Our next speaker is Professor Joachim Scholderer. He's a research director at Center for Corporate Social Responsibility at the University of Zurich, and where he's working with sustainability questions in cooperation with the university and with big banks, actually, who are very concerned about sustainability. And also he is a professor of quantitative methods at Aarhus University in Denmark, where he's been working for many years. To begin with the group MAP, working with consumer attitudes and food policies. And now he is working there with quantitative methods. And he's been writing a lot about biotechnology and climate change, health claims, methods of measuring motivations, etc. So, hypes, fears, facts and hopes. Possible futures of food. The floor is yours.
Can you hear me? All right, thank you, Leonard, and thank you very much for inviting me here. I'm very honored that the Foundation and the Academy asked me to come here. And what you asked me to talk about is, again, about innovation. So I'm going to continue where Lynn stopped. But what I would like to do is I would like to take a sort of longer, a bird's eye view. So one of my jobs is that I'm professor of quantitative methods. So what I teach typically in the classroom is statistics, it's forecasting, it's data mining and machine learning. And when we want to make long-range forecasts, so here, for example, what are possible futures of food? What we actually do is we look into the past, right? We try to identify patterns and regularities. For the one thing, these are trends, so things that pretty much continue the same way in the future. And the other part of that is regime changes or breaks in time series. So what is that changes the nature of a process? And I thought about, okay, what am I going to talk about here? Possible futures of food, right? So one could say anything. And I thought I'll start with looking back. The big waves, the big types of regimes that govern what happens in our businesses during my lifetime, at least. So you could understand these as meta topics, who are the drivers of most innovation activity that happens in a particular phase. And there are certain hypes connected with this, cycles of hypes, cycles of disillusionment, and so on. But they never really go away. So most of them result in a huge amount of innovation activity that in a way lifts what's happening in the food industry and in food markets to a new level of performance. So even though nowadays we don't really remember much of the total quality management revolution of the 80s, it's of course still there. You know, everybody does quality management. The same with like the functional foods wave. They're not gone, right? I mean, the hype is over maybe, but they're still there and there are good products out there. So a little bit about this idea of meta topics and hype cycles. So as I said before, much of what I'm doing nowadays is about, well, what used to be called big data. That's already a term that's gone out of fashion too, so machine learning, data mining, and so on. And this is an IT topic, and in IT there is a consulting company called Gartner, and they have it's actually a branded concept, and it's called the hype cycle. And these major waves of innovative activity in tech, they typically follow a certain pattern. So there's a certain trigger, you know, new concepts, new ways of approaching a problem become available, and then all the rage starts. And at some time we have real hype, and then after a while it becomes obvious that things are not so easy to solve, and that many of these wild ideas that have been put forward in the beginning are probably not survivors. So this then sinks into a trough of disillusionment, so where everybody thinks, hey, okay, that was all hype, nothing more. But in a way, it's nothing is ever completely lost. So there's always some survivor technologies who then make it, who become mainstream technologies and so on, and who lift the whole industry to a new plateau of productivity. And in IT, there are, for example, these sorts of things people are talking about. So this is actually last year's hype cycle, and there you see things like Internet of Things and so on, cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin and so on. At the height of the hype, and if you look at it now, it's probably already sort of a bit further down here. So Internet of Things, something that next year nobody's going to talk about anymore. There will be other terms, and there will be a refinement of these concepts. But these very flashy ideas, like 2 years ago it was big data, and last year the Internet of Things, they will sort of people will become disillusioned. But it's going to be there, right? So, we're going to see this implemented in actual business in a while. And if we try to apply this sort of thinking of hype cycles to our business, so food, I think we've gone through 4 stages. And I don't want to go back all the way to when people started to think about agriculture, but restrict this more to my lifetime. So let's think back at the 1980s. So I think you can say that the 1980s were the decade of quality. And try to remember what it was like back then. I mean, I think the most obvious cultural sign of this was the Japan hysteria back then, right? Remember what it was like, we have these impressive numbers. For example, when Toyota sort of managed to increase its productivity to more than 4 times that of GM, and GM stands for General Motors here, not genetic modification. The big Japanese conglomerates basically went on a buying spree in the States. So they bought up stuff in Detroit and so on. And if you look at the cultural iconography of the times, so for example, if you watch Back to the Future again, then the future back then is owned by Japanese conglomerates. Or if you read old William Gibson novels, California is called Nissan County in those novels. So that was in a way a new approach of managing industrial production processes. The Toyota production system, and then part of the whole Japanese total quality management approach, right? So, for example, quality function deployment that made it into an issue in the Harvard Business Review first time in 1988. And back then at MAP, we also translated this into a Q-food approach and so on. So this made its way into innovation management in the food industry at that time. Also a hallmark event is, I think, the foundation of the journal in our scene, so food quality and preference. The journal that was concerned with the systematic measurement and management of food quality from a consumer perspective. And we even constructed models like this here, total food quality model. Remember that? Actually, my colleague Klaus Grunert, if you ask him about this, he always thought about this more as a pedagogical device to explain how this all hangs together, but it was a big thing back then. So this whole thinking in terms of what was first called just-in-time production, then total quality management, later Six Sigma, and nowadays basically lean management. This is something that became a standard way of managing mass production, also and particularly in big food, and is of course still around. I mean, nobody really talks much about it anymore, it's what we do. And I think if we, because this is a consumer session, right, if we think about what has this done on the consumer product interface, then what it gave us is probably the professionalization of sensory science, right? So that is the age where sensory became big and was in that way planned experimental designs, clean psychophysical measurement and so on. When that became, in a way, the mainstream in big food companies. So making the consumer experience measurable and quantifiable. And the idea here is, of course, always to assess systematically consumer perceptions and preferences of and for products, and then to translate them into product design parameters with a very clear optimization rationale behind it. And in industry, the aim is, of course, to produce high and stable qualities with very narrow tolerances. So again, the TQM idea, it's part of this. And sensory is now something which all of us in some or the other way have to do with it. Some of us do it in the lab, right? Others work with the results. It has become an essential part of new product development in all large food companies. But there were also phases of disillusionment. So one thing is, of course, the sheer cost of this, right? So sensory science is not something that happens in SMEs. And there are, of course, ways we have been dealing with this, so the development of all these rapid and robust methods to cut the costs, but still SMEs are, in a way, is not where this sort of thing is really applied. Then another thing, maybe closer to the consumer, the home kitchen. One thing that always can be quite disturbing if you launch a new product to the market is when you look what consumers actually do at home with a product. So like nobody follows these suggested preparation routines. So the sensory profiles of the stuff consumers actually eat and that which sort of you are expecting them to eat, that might be two entirely different worlds, right? So this is a bit uncontrollable. Then the food service sector is something where the application of sensory science was always a bit of a frustrating exercise. And there are good reasons for this, because, for example, if you look at a buffet, right, and then no two meals that people pick from a buffet are in any way even similar. So in a way, like the idea of a standardized experimental design with replications and so on, this doesn't really apply much to the food service sector. And it is kind of difficult to get a handle. I mean, we've tried that too, and it wasn't particularly successful, but people are still working on it. And of course, the eternal pain in the neck here, that sensory preference scores are not predictive of market success. We don't like to talk about it, but it has to be said, right? This is something that we also try to improve, but where we're not there yet, so there is room to grow. Now, let's move on, the 1990s, and I think the marker events of the 1990s are food safety events. Lynn has already talked about some of these. It probably started with the infamous E. coli outbreak at Jack in the Box. This was stylized to the event that made Americans change the way they eat it. So the introduction of cooking thermometers and all these technologies that basically had its point of departure here. And from nowadays perspective, it was actually a relatively small outbreak, right? Only 4 people died. But these were children, and then the court cases that went on, I mean, this was a big market event, and in a way it heralded a second age of food safety. Then next thing happened in Europe, BSE. We all remember that, right? Started in Britain and then in 2000 hit the continent. And then on the more big technology side, it was the GM foods debate and the moratorium in 1999. And this was in a way a bit of a game changer, because what we thought back then was that we were in a crisis, in a phase of crisis of confidence, so that basically people had lost trust in the systems that regulate and control the food chain. And there was a lot of activity back then, so the EU responded with a complete overhaul of its food safety legislation and the food control systems. And we got an enormous push of technical innovations. So traceability and labeling systems, rapid alert systems, so the RAS and the non-food equivalent, the RAPEX. The precautionary principle as a legitimate basis for regulation that didn't exist before in Europe. It came in 2000, in that time. The creation of EFSA. EFSA is a relatively new animal. Back then, it wasn't there. And this all worked to some degree. I'm not quite sure if these are the causes that it went quiet for about 10 years, but it did so. And I think this was also, on the technical side, it was quite successful. So like risk assessment and management, they were raised to completely new levels. However, some things did not quite work. So as I already said, we're still not good at risk communication. We have some ideas where one should look, but it hasn't really been implemented much yet. So there's still a lot of room for work. And there are blind spots here too, where all the food safety control systems don't really, they can't get their teeth in a way. So one thing is the home kitchen, right? So this is where a lot of cross-contamination, of course, happens these days. And this is not controllable by sort of HACCP systems and official food control systems. Then something similar, which is maybe not quite on our radar yet, is the emergence of the sharing economy. I don't know if you've gone to a local sort of neighborhood food fair lately. Nobody uses gloves. There's no hygiene. Nobody can even wash their hands. So, you know, it's aunties from the neighborhood who prepare probably quite dangerous food. So, you know, there's simply no system to keep this in check. Or the Airbnb equivalent to a restaurant. You know, there's sort of invite guests, invite yourself type of systems where private persons invite anonymous others via some sort of social media system to participate in the dinner for a small contribution of money. And you know, this is basically a commercial service that is completely unregulated and unchecked. And these things are growing. And then fresh local foods. So if we think what happened since these big marker outbreaks, there was one in 2011. This was another E. coli serotype, but also EHEC, and it killed 53. Right? This was the Spout case in Germany. This is in a way like it was a much more extreme one than the Jack-in-the-Box outbreak in 1993 in the States. It's only 4 victims only. But you know, this was an organic local farm. All right? So very awkward. All right? This is something where the food control system is probably not really really well geared up to. I mean, nowadays most contamination cases are actually caught at the borders, right? So when stuff enters the EU, this sort of thing, like sort of more or less local distribution of fresh produce, organic, this is still a problem. Okay. So food safety, I think this is returning to some degree. If we now go to the North, so the first decade of the third millennium, then I think that can be characterized as the age of the consumer health bubble. And is there anybody who wasn't involved in this somehow? Yeah, we all were. So I'll not go back to the full beginning, but this here is it's the result of a market survey I did in 2008. And this describes in a way like the state of the world functional foods product landscape in the year 2007. And back then, health claims were still largely unregulated in most parts of the world. So if you distill this a bit and map this into a low-dimensional metric, you could get a picture like this. So there are basically three types or three clusters of products, active ingredients, and the related health claims. So the big thing is the dairy ghetto down here, you know, with all the, what was back then called probiotics and so on. Up here you have basically the energy drinks ghetto and the fitness drinks ghetto, and here the rest. And well, you remember the products we had back then, and there was also a time where there was not so much restriction on their marketing. Nothing much was really happening here. The cardiovascular claim is mainly linked to this cluster of products because there are fish products in there. Right? So this is, yeah, let's say the state of the functional foods market before the storm. And we all know what happened, right? This here is from an EU project we had back then, where we did an install survey also of products of unlicensed health claim use in the year 2008. And there was, yeah, I mean, it wasn't particularly extreme, but in some countries you had like up to 10% of the products in these categories here, which we just use as a sample, who were carrying unlicensed health claims, either on the front or the back of the product. And then, of course, came the big crackdown. The regulation on nutrition and health claims. And this was a big debate and in a way also a bloodbath for the functional foods industry. And in 2007, Tino Beck-Lars and I, we wrote this paper here in Trends. And back then we already thought, okay, you know, so the whole spirit of that regulation back then, you know, people, particularly the big players in the industry, still believed that this would steer the functional food market into a more regular, a more smooth growth direction. So in fact, many of the big food companies and ingredient manufacturers, they supported this very strong regulation, right? I mean, nowadays some people like not to remember this, but this was very much pushed by the big ones. And we were kind of skeptical about this, right? Because the whole idea is that you basically try to treat functional ingredients almost in the manner of evidence-based medicine. But people do not eat medicine, they eat food products, right? And I think nowadays we all have understood that these are very different things. So if you want to sell a functional food, it has to be, first and foremost, a very good food product. Just the fringe benefit of some active compound, that's not going to solve the problem. And this was quite a bloodbath, as we all know. So yesterday I've just made the latest count of how many of these claims actually survived the EFSA assessment, and it's not a lot. Also the reasons why they didn't pass the assessment, and typically this is very straightforward. So either the claim has not been substantiated, that's the lion's share, or the food as such, the basis has not been characterized enough, or the claim defect is not even sufficiently defined. So what, for example, is probiotic, right? And well, of course we can't say probiotic anymore, but never mind. So this is something that has basically made the market stagnate since 2008. The market is flat. The total sales worldwide are not growing. They're not shrinking either, but there's no growth anymore since then. Now, instead of these hard health claims, we of course now have substitute types of product positioning. And this is an analysis of all product launches in Europe, all packaged food launches from 1997 to 2015. 2015, these are about 70,000 in this year, right? 70,000 food products. We see that most of these sort of strong health positionings, they have had their heyday in the mid-North, so like in the years 2005 to 2007, and then basically the crackdown began, and we saw other types of positioning rising and filling that vacuum. That's all clean label positionings, right? And there's a bunch of them. The most common one nowadays is no additives or preservatives. So this relates to a lot of other talks at this conference. And these are right now 16% of all foods in Europe. 16, right? Then the second and third most frequent health positioning are low, no, or reduced allergen and gluten-free. And that's more or less the same products typically, because it's typically gluten they focus on. And the rest are basically shrinking. So like even low, no, reduced fat and sugar and so on, isn't really much happening in terms of new product activity anymore. So there's a sort of, personally I find this unhealthy, single-minded focus on clean labels. Other types of health innovations don't happen anymore, at least not sold anymore. So this is a problem, and we'll probably discuss more about this during this session. The real tragedy about this is that, in a way, health claims never really worked on consumers anyway. So, I mean, of all the studies I did on functional food products, almost everyone looked like this, null results. And other sort of people just don't really care for their wound-healing medicinal properties. There's of course a small segment of consumers who respond to that, but like having them in a consumer test, because these are so few, yeah, it's unlikely that it will actually happen in the sample. So this is a fairly typical outcome. Nutrition content claims were just fine, you know, often even better than the hard health claims. So in a way it was all, you know, much ado about nothing. Right, now the present decade, so the teenage years of the third millennium, right now much is really about sustainability in one or the other form, or something that at least looks like it. So Ling has already said a lot about food waste and food security issues. I'm going to talk about, again, packaged products in Europe and basically how industry tries to sell them and whether that works and why. So one thing about sustainability positioning is that this can mean almost anything. right? It's extremely flexible. So you can distinguish different classes of sustainability. What's the biggest or the most common way of trying to position a product as environmentally friendly now is actually to simply sort of praise its packaging. So of all environmental or sustainability claims, this is the most frequent one, and it's 15% of all products launched in Europe this year. Right? Organic went through some crisis, is up there again, but there has been quite some unrest lately, so that might drop again. Then vegetarian, well actually they're all rising apart from the GMO-free, which is falling, so there's not so much of an issue. So the thing is, you know, if you look through this list, right, what is particularly sustainable about vegan foods? Right? Does it have any environmental benefit? Possibly. Depends on what otherwise would have been in there, right? Or ethical human, this stands for fair trade. What does fair trade have? Okay, I mean, it's of course one sustainability dimension, but it doesn't do anything for the environment. But the thing is that everything is so mixed up in this very holistic concept of some form of sustainable positioning that the things that truly matter, they sometimes disappear. And the clean label strategies, in a way, consumers tend to mix them up with this too. All right? So this is, it's a tricky thing. Now, another thing that makes sustainability positioning so incredibly flexible is that there are thousands of certification schemes, not all of which are particularly trustworthy. So I've just picked some that are the most frequent one in the German-speaking world. So here we have like eco-labels. These are relatively high standard, often based on life cycle analysis. Here we have organic labels, typically not based on life cycle analysis, but on, say, a priori considerations of what makes good organic agriculture. Then we have all these fair trade labels, some of them trustworthy, others not. And we have this whole, should I say, mess of naturalness labels, because naturalness is not a term that is regulated. There's like all sorts of consulting shops that sell these certification schemes, and it's unregulated growth. I know that the US and France, they have considered starting regulating the term naturalness, but the lobbies have like killed this very efficiently quite early in the process. The other thing is that you can extend this very easily into product categories. So this is, for example, sort of a small career of the product categories through which organic certification moved. So you know, it started basically all with fresh produce. And things we do get is, for example, organic flea shampoo. Interesting, right? What exactly is that? And I think this is the most cynical product, but organic one-way plates. Think about this for a minute, right? So, you know, it's extremely cynical to try to sell such a consumer product, right? Yeah, it's of course one-way plates, but it's organic, so they're good for the environment. And you think, right, yeah, T-shirts. Or like fair trade, you know, from fair trade coffee where it all started, to fair trade cleaning detergents, fair trade foot lotion, and a big fair trade vodka range. Right. But you know, this is in a way what's driving this is it's not really a consumer trend. You know, most consumers find these products ridiculous too. But so to a large degree, you know, sustainability nowadays is not really a very consumer-driven trend anymore. It was in the beginning, in the 80s and early 90s, But nowadays it's actually driven by industry. It basically starts down from the retailers who sort of require that the manufacturers have certain certifications in order to get listed for their products. And this is of course then handed up the supply chain. So all the big food manufacturers, they have their supply chain management strategies and supplier codes. So like you have to have all sorts of quality and safety certifications, some environmental certification, and some CSR certification and so on. Otherwise, you just don't have a chance to sell product there. Right? And this goes up, so I think some of them are now like at the level of certifying the third tier of their suppliers and so on. And this drives the business because everybody has to have these certifications. You know, you can just as well try to use them and throw such somewhat ridiculous products like this on the market, but you have to have the certifications anyway, so might just try. Right? But is this a consumer trend? I don't know. So what next? If we look at what's the typical positioning of foods nowadays, then with what we do right now, sort of the marketing differentiation possibilities are coming a bit to an end, right? So, it's not as if this is something special anymore. Like, so no less than 50% of all food products that are on the market right now, they carry at least one health or sustainability claim, often both. And just yesterday I looked like at the milk I was putting in my coffee in the morning and it had 10 of them. So this is the mainstream. It's not a differentiation anymore. And the problematic thing I find is that much of that is like it's following some sort of clean label strategy. And that often functions as a catch-all. So clean means safe, right? Clean means healthy. Clean means ethical. Clean means environmentally friendly. So in a way, it's like it's a catch-all strategy for like invoking some sort of vague, warm glow feeling at confrontation with a product that, however, doesn't really do anything, right? So, and this is something that can sometimes make me angry. So the environmental impact of a clean label product is, well, it's just the same as another product, right? So it doesn't have any positive environmental effects. So this goes as something which is called sustainability. So like, I mean, if you're serious about like the environment, then it can piss you off. So, but I mean, people are also spotting this. So these frivolous products I showed before, I mean, this starts to sort of become a credibility problem. And I think we need innovations, right? So, and not just in product development, there's a lot of stuff out there, but also in marketing. I mean, like, this here is the lamest duck there is. Everybody has it. You can't sell product based on that anymore. So one has to go further and be maybe a little bit more creative, develop something new. Now, so I try to look back in time over the last 40 years, the quality age, the safety age, the health age and the sustainability age, and you can of course wonder what are the triggers of the next big wave of innovations in food. And I think digitalization is one candidate that there hasn't really been so much happening yet. If you compare it to, say, banking, nowadays I live in Zurich, so it's a lot of banking stuff I do. So many banks understand themselves as software companies with main applications in the financial services sector. So in food, this is of course difficult to do because the product is not digitalizable and cannot be digitally delivered. But some things, some parts of the supply chain can, and it's of course happening. Trade liberalization, I think, depending on what goes forward with the TTIP negotiations and what comes afterwards, things may change. So of course nobody really tells us what they have already agreed upon, but it might well be that we have growth hormones and GM foods in Europe very soon. And of course we all wonder if people really still care. I don't know. We'll see. Right? Then climate change. Big topic. And this is of course something we're all working right now on. So, so what will happen if, for example, the zones in which you can actually do agriculture, if they migrate north? So, the big corn chambers of the world are northern Canada and Siberia. Right? I mean, it's going to change the power balance of the world somewhat. Probably also the product supply. So there's much that could happen there. Then, of course, there are some production chains that are more unsustainable than others. So, of course, the beef and dairy issue, right? So, meat replacement products, non-dairy dairy products. This is something many of us have also probably worked on for quite a while. It's possible, but it's a challenge because, of course, also requires other ways of preparing food, and for most consumers this is not so easy. But I think we've made some very good experiences also with using those in big food service establishments. In the food service establishment, I think it's in a way much easier than on the consumer market. So that might be an interesting thing, and then of course the whole non-traditional protein sources issue. So seaweeds, insects, and so on. A lot of people are working on this now, and it seems like, you know, even Europeans might not be quite as adverse as everybody thought. So again, as Lynn said, if you actually ask people out there, free living consumers, then they might find this quite interesting. Okay, yeah. So that was the look into the crystal ball. These are questions rather than answers, and in a way, because we're the people probably many in the business listen to, it's up to us what happens. All right. So what do we want to happen? Thank you very much.